like meadow grass on the tide, and the raindrops on my window, and the ice in my drink. Baby, all I can think of is Alice.
Tom Waits is an American blues slash jazz slash experimental singer, songwriter, and musician. He started out as a jazz musician and singer in 1971, vocal jazz, and he morphed into more blues folk area. And then as time went on, he got some decidedly experimental elements going on in his music. He's created a kind of hobo slash beat poet persona. He's been incredibly successful worldwide. He's also worked as an actor. Since his first album came out in 1973, he's had 17 more. Hi, my name's Dan. So this was Tom Waits' 14th studio album, and I've not heard this album before, but I have heard Tom Waits before. In fact, I've reviewed a few of his albums before, some for this series, some for a previous series that I was doing. So I kind of knew what to expect because I've had some Tom Waits experience. Apparently there's a songs from a play of the same name called Alice, which was originally performed in Hamburg in 1992 and has been performed all over the world since, apparently. So the songs are 10 years old at this stage when this album's been released. And I think that kind of, in my kind of very poor history of Tom Waits, fits that it feels like it's a bit earlier in terms of his stuff. The music's quite straightforward. The arrangements are not necessarily what you'd imagine if you haven't come across Tom Waits. They're very Tom Waits. So some of them feel like jazz, and whenever he actually has drums in the background, it tends to feel like jazz. Some of them feel like folk because it's kind of very acoustic. Some of it you might describe as being chamber something, and that word is often used to imply that classical instruments are being used. In fact, there's a lot of interesting instruments being used in here. So the closest thing to a synth in here is a mellotron, which is a very early kind of sampler that used tapes and has a very distinctive sound that was used in progressive rock in the 70s. There's lots of odd bits of percussion as well as normal drums. There's credited for a scraper. There's some weird violins as well as normal violins. There's brass, there's bells, there's clarinet, all sorts of odd things being used as well as kind of normal instruments like, electric guitars and stuff like that. And musically, it's kind of, so as I said, it's musically quite straightforward. It means it's got chord projections, it's got tunes, and it feels kind of slowish. I want to say mellow, but it's not really. It's got a kind of, somehow manages a tension between mellow and intense, because the whole thing is fairly intense, really. It's quite it's a mildly challenging to listen to in some ways. So let's move on to the singing. So Tom Waits is singing. He's got a low, gravelly voice, and he uses it in a variety of different performance ways. Sometimes he just growls and gravels as much as he can. Sometimes he puts on kind of weird voices. There's one song in which he kind of goes very percussive with his voice, and sometimes that comes across as a bit odd. Why is he particularly doing that in this song? Do you want to know? But at the core, this is really about the songwriting, and the songs are written by Tom and his wife, Kathleen Brennan. And I haven't got anywhere near enough time to dig very deeply into the songs here, but there's a lot going on. They tend to be dark and picturesque. It feels a bit like some kind of freak show, and particularly because there seems to be a few songs that are particularly about people who are abnormal in terms of things to do with their body. And they're often evoking stories. So there's one song called Poor Edward, which Wikipedia draws out as being a song about someone who was an urban myth that was reported in some journal about a guy with another face on the back of his head that would whisper to him in his sleep. There's no evidence that this was an actual case. There's a song about a guy called Tabletop Joe, which I think is an invention of Tom Waits's, as a guy who basically doesn't have any legs or bottom half of his body. There's a song called Reaper Barn, and so it was. I performed first of all with this in this play. I believe Reaper Barn is in Hamburg. It's the notorious red light district there. There's all sorts of other stuff in here in the songs. There's lots of very interesting and careful use of words. It's very poetic. It's quite artistic. There's one song in particular, I can't remember what that one's called, that uses a lot of picture language and stuff. That one particular phrase that jumped out at me was "your champagne laugh." It's just a great phrase, and there's some really good songwriting in here, particularly the lyrics. There's lots to get into. Now, I would admit that probably because I've listened to some, and probably enough, I think, at this stage, Tom Waits before, I feel acclimatized. I feel like I knew what was coming, and I enjoyed this quite a bit. I definitely engaged with this album. There's, as I say, I think a lot to get into. It's definitely quirky. I'm not always convinced by his vocal delivery, because some of it's just a bit odd without particular reasons to it. But the songwriting is, quite frankly, superb on the album. I really quite enjoyed it quite a bit. And that's what I think. So we're done. Except for, please, don't be shy. Please tell me what you think by talking to me through the comments box. And that's it from me for now.
Everything you can think of is true. Before the ocean was blue, we were lost in a flood, run red with your blood, Nigerian skeleton.